So, Ghost Story. It's a love story. It's a tragic romance about two young people, Alex and Daisy, who are desperately in love. And then Daisy dies. And so it's all about Alex's attempts to deal with this, to move on and live his life without her. And about his utter failure to do so. His descent into depression, alcoholism and madness. And then at his lowest point, Daisy comes back as a ghost. And she's able to become corporeal, to be physical, to actually touch him and the rest of the world, only when she takes the life essence out of something living. When she draws the life from a flower or a plant or an animal, if need be. And so suddenly they can have this perfect relationship. You know, the relationship that they didn't have when she was alive because she was so sick. You know, he's so happy. She's so happy. And then at their highest point, Alex becomes convinced. He begins to suspect that actually she only exists in his head. That she's a figment of his imagination created as the final stage in his madness. And at the same time, she learns that if he forgets her, if he moves on, and if he stops loving her, her spirit will be condemned to wander eternity alone. There's no way that she'll be able to move on to the next stage, whatever that is. And so it's all about that. It's that love story. And it's about love and death and chance. The chance that she lived. It's a 50-50 chance that she's given at the start of the film. And so it's all about that. It's all about Alex's decisions and her decisions. And what if they'd made different ones? The whole story would have been different. And so it's about love and death and chance. It's all about the chance that she'd survived, the chance that he'd made different decisions the whole way through. You know, would they have worked? Would they, even if she'd survived, actually worked out? And things happen later on that I'm not going to spoil, where they come to very clear decisions about what they've got to do. And at each one, if different things happen, you know, how would that have changed their story? And so it's a very optimistic film about love and about how sometimes it works even though it shouldn't, and how sometimes it doesn't work even though it should. And so it does some quite interesting things with multiple worlds, and there's little bits of quantum physics in there that you might not even notice if you don't know about it. And so that's what it's about. It's a love story. And the idea was to write the most perfect love story I could, the one that I'd want to go and see. And so that's what I was going for. I don't think that love stories just have to be for girls, for women. I think they can be interesting and classics. And so what I was going for is I was trying to write something that essentially works as part of a trilogy with Truly, Madly, Deeply and Ghost and all those other films that deal with people who died too young, but saying very different things. So the inspiration for Ghost Story came a good number of years ago now. When I was about 19, I had a girlfriend who got very sick. She nearly died. And obviously she survived. But the question always remained in my head, you know, just at the back, niggling away, what if she'd died? And I felt horrible about it. But it's a question that I think everyone has in that sort of situation. It's a very natural question to wonder about different possibilities, about what would have happened in a different universe where something slightly different had worked out. And although I felt terrible about it, I always knew it was a good story. And about a year ago, I finally sat down. I thought that actually the time had come. I thought up enough interesting ways to twist it, enough interesting questions that I could answer using this story, that it was time to write it. And so I took inspiration not only from that, but from my own interest in quantum physics and in love stories throughout the ages, and mashing them all together to try to create what I thought was this love story that anyone could enjoy. And so it's Truly, Madly, Deeply and Ghost, both of which, you know, hugely inspired me. One of the ideas is that this is essentially the third in a trilogy. They're all asking questions about death and love, but taking very different approaches to them. And so that's one of the things I was going for. And so obviously, and love stories throughout the ages have always said, but what if you died? You know, would you still love me? And can you love someone after death? And I thought that was a really interesting question. So that was something that I really wanted to answer. So I've been writing since I was a kid, really. One of the things my mum's got is a printed out copy that she typed up of a thing I wrote when I was about 3 or 4, which is a story about a cheetah and an eagle who go off and have adventures, you know, and then get back in time for tea. So I've been writing since I was really little, but I've never really, I didn't want to do it as a kid. I didn't think I was good enough. I always wanted to be something like an astronaut or a vet or a fireman. I was a weird kid. But stuff that I wanted to do, and I ended up going to do a degree in law, which I didn't really enjoy. I spent all of my time not doing law. I was watching films and reading and acting and writing. Not films, but pantos. I did a few pantos at the college I was at. And they're not very good, but it was all the steps. It was learning that was actually something I quite enjoyed. And so when I finished my degree, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do, I thought, yeah, actually I'd quite like to find out if I could actually be a writer. Find out if I'm any good. And this was the question, you know, was I good enough? And so I practiced. I got a crappy job and I practiced. And so I did that for 2 years, and I've now got to the point where I think actually I've actually got to a good point. You know, I think I look at my work and I sort of think, I'm not terrible. And so that's good. And so it's nice to be able to look at your work and actually be able to read it and not just be constantly critical. You know, just a critical every now and again, you know, quite a lot. But, you know, it's a good position. And so the idea of writing as a career is something which is possibly the best way of spending my life. You know, I've always had huge numbers of stories just playing around in my head. And I never really had a way of getting them down, and so now I've tried screenwriting and discovered that it's something not only that I enjoy, but that I think I'm quite good at. That's amazing. The idea of spending my entire life, my career, writing the stories down, which are in my head, would be, you know, it's something that just fills me with absolute joy every time I think about it. It would be amazing. I just love writing and getting down words that I think people might want to hear, you know, or read, or see people play these stories out on screen. It's an incredible rush. So I've apparently got a very British taste in terms of the films that I watch and the books that I read. So I grew up watching the Ealing comedies, and I've got so much love for them. Films like The Titfield Thunderbolt and Passport to Pimlico and The Ladykillers. These are films which, you know, really, really brilliantly blend humour and satire and political commentary, and that's wonderful. And I don't really think we've got that anymore. I think it's something that's lacking in British cinema, and so I'd quite like to bring that back. But it's you know, we had that in the 90s. You've got things like The Full Monty and Brassed Off, which are really politically vicious in a lot of ways, as well as telling these brilliant stories about these brilliant characters. And I think they work really well. And so they're films that I will just watch just to pick up on knowing that it's possible. So you know, when I'm having a really rough day trying to write something, just knowing that someone's done it before, you know, it bodes well. And obviously these are brilliant writers, and I'd love to get to their level in a lot of ways. But then again, I also love the slightly more American style films. The Fifth Element I will watch again and again and again. I think it's the most visually incredible film, and it's just written so tightly, and it just works and flows. Very similar in a lot of ways to The Princess Bride, which I'll just watch just because it's brilliantly written. You know, I think, and I have problems with Goldman in terms of how he writes a lot of his stuff, but he's very good. And so The Princess Bride is wonderful. But then again, I also love Terry Gilliam, or Gilliam. I never know entirely how to pronounce his name, but he makes the most incredible, often underrated films. I think Tideland, which not very many people know about. It was never pushed that hard, but I think it's you know, almost his masterpiece. You know, Brazil and 12 Monkeys are fantastic, but Tideland tells, you know, the most incredibly beautifully shot. Whoever was DP on that was wonderful, but tells such a brilliant story about this little girl and how she creates this fantasy world. And I love that. I think that's really something to work at. And then in terms of books, some of my favourite books, I love the Terry Pratchett Discord series. I sort of grew up on that as a teenager, and I still dip into them every now and again. If I've got 2 hours to kill and a really small bag, and I'm going on a train journey, I'll shove in a Discord book and I'll have a great time. I've just recently read The House of Leaves, which I will go back to so often. I just know that it's a brilliant book by Danielewski. Horror and love and everything, and it's wonderful. But yeah, so I read pretty widely. I spend most of my time at the minute reading non-fiction, doing research, but I'm catching up on all of the books the classic books that I've never read and I never got a chance to read at university. So the best book, Pride and Prejudice. It's not very cool for a guy to say it, but absolutely wonderful. Well, I'm currently writing a play. I need to get it finished fairly soon, so I'm currently sort of slamming my way through it, about Shakespeare. It's called The Dark Years. It's about Shakespeare as a young man when he's about 25, 26, so nearly my age. So it's got a certain level of autobiographical content, but not quite, because he's a massively horrible person in this film, this play. It's an adaptation of Titus Andronicus. So it's taking the revenge story, getting rid of the rape and the hand chopping off, but keeping the story of revenge, which I think is the most interesting thing in it. And so it's all about Shakespeare in the years 1588 to 1595, when we've got no solid records of his life. We know that he went from Stratford to London and he began to make his name as a writer. He's mentioned, at either end. Except we don't know how he did it. And so this is trying to answer, it's positing an answer to this question and saying that he was this incredibly ambitious young man and he's trying to make his name known and trying to become the best writer that he knows he can be. And he is the best writer around. And so it's all about his relationship with an older lady who's an established writer, but secretly, because he couldn't be a female writer back then. And so it's all about that, and about his relationship with her, how they fall in love, and how he screws her over, and how it turns into this revenge cycle. And so I think it's really interesting, because it's got really interesting implications for the rest of his works, and kind of explains potentially why he wrote comedies after his son Hamnet died. So that's kind of fun. I'm also just started, I'm writing the treatment for it at the moment, a film about, it's a redemption story, about a fallen priest, a priest who's done something really bad and against the Catholic Church's rules, and a homeless man who thinks that he's Satan. He thinks that he's Lucifer, the first fallen angel. And so it's those two basically both seeking redemption at the same time as the apocalypse happens. And I think that's a really interesting story. I think Lucifer and Satan is a really interesting character, and one that hasn't been done in this way before. So I'm trying to do something new with him, and I think that's kind of fun. I'm also working on Being British, which is, it's not a mockumentary, so I'm calling it a fictional documentary. It's a documentary about 4 or 5 young people who are amateur documentary makers, who are making a documentary about what it means to be British in today's modern Britain. Because I don't know what that actually is. I'm slightly conflicted in my own mind. I was born in Wales, started to grow up there, and I've had huge connections to Wales all through my life. But I've lived huge amounts of my life in England as well. And so you've got all these people coming from everywhere and living in Britain. And I don't know what it actually means. It used to be politeness and manners and stiff upper lip and all that. But I'm not entirely sure it is these days. So it's trying to answer that question. And so this is what they're trying to do, except they accidentally uncover a conspiracy to start race riots, so that a mainstream political party can implement the equivalent of martial law and solidify their hold on the country. And so that's kind of fun. I think that'll be quite good. And I'm also playing around with short stories, which I've never done before. I've also I'm just about to start writing at some point. Just finished the treatment for an old Ealing-style comedy about a group of residents of an old people's home who rob a jewellery store. And so yeah, that's good, that's funny. It's a bit different. So all of these are trying to push myself in different genres. I want to answer different questions. I don't want to be stuck with anything. So they're all not like Ghost Story. I'm trying to do something very different in each script, just so I keep myself interested, really.